Welcome to the media show. We have three excellent journalists with us who have been covering the world and who have traveled outside India to discuss what is our top story, which is obviously Afghanistan and the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban. So we have Saeed Naqvi, senior editor, author, television commentator, interviewer. He has not only traveled across India, he's traveled across the world. He's covered conflict across the world, whether it's the Sino-Vietnam War, the US bombing of Libya, the Nicaragua War, Operation Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syrian conflict, everything. So he's really so well qualified to talk to us about what happens and what are the kind of problems that journalists face, and particularly Indian journalists. We have Dr. Waiel Awwad, who is a writer. He's a political analyst, Southeast or South Asia, sorry, based journalist since 1979. And he's traveled across. He's, of course, from the region of West Asia. He has been covering conflict. He has had encounters with extremists. He has faced threats to his life and has been, and he was ambushed in Iraq in 2003 when the US invasion was taking place. So, you know, he comes with a whole body of work behind him and will be speaking to us about Afghanistan and what journalists encounter. And then, of course, we have Kanika Gupta, a totally homespun young journalist who was on the same flight that brought the Indian ambassador and other embassy staff back from Afghanistan after the Taliban took over. She was reporting from Kabul. She has a first-hand view of what really was happening there. And we're so glad to have all of you here. And Kanika has just sort of made it out in time and is here safe with us. So let's reverse the order. Kanika, since you're the one who has faced this right and very, very recently, and as we speak, tell us how it was for you when you traveled out and what was it like when you heard that the Taliban has taken over Kabul?
When the news of the Taliban takeover came out, it was still in those were still rumors. There was no concrete evidence of that happening. And as a journalist, when I hear something, the first thing I do is to go check online if there is any veritable information about it. So I was seated with a bunch of women, and we were sitting in the security briefing and in the Ministry of Women's Affairs. I was sitting there, and their boss was discussing, okay, now that the situation is getting critical by the day, how shall we maintain your security of coming and going from the office? In that instance, someone just started crying, and there was a lot of running around outside in the corridors. And it turned out that there is news that the Taliban have entered the capital. So I was a bit baffled, and I was wondering, like, where is this news coming from? Where did you hear it? How did, and everybody's phone started buzzing, and women were really, really worried. They all started crying. They were very scared of what is going to come for them. They were extremely, extremely pensive as to what lies ahead for them now. So it was a shocking thing to see, because these women have made such huge contributions to the Afghan economy, and also in upliftment of other women. When they were basically leading by example. So when I saw them crumbling in front of my eyes, it was extremely nerve-wracking, and I felt really bad. And I checked online, and then within an hour or so, the news came that the president has fled the country and that the government has been formally taken over by the Taliban. So I think there was a lot of panic and confusion in the streets of Kabul, because nobody knew that right now that the Taliban are sort of on standby outside the city limits, and that nobody has entered. But then there was this fear, that image in the mind of, maybe 10s and 20s, 20 Talibans, like seated in a pickup truck, breaching the city limits with their guns and RPGs. So it was a very scary image that people had in their minds, and there was a lot of panic. And since I was also out of my house at that time, so even I was scared, that especially as a woman, because I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and I wasn't really dressed per se, according to the Taliban code of covering myself up. So I was naturally very scared and worried that what if, somebody intercepts me on the way, and what if I get in trouble and I'm away from home? So a lot of things were going through my mind as well. And as a female reporter, especially someone who does not have the backing of a newsroom, I felt extremely vulnerable that I don't know what's going to happen now, because if I'm in trouble, there's literally no one looking out for me right now.
Yeah, so we'll talk about how you got back in a second. Let me go on to Dr. Awwad and tell us a little bit, why I want these stories out is really for people to understand what really happens to journalists when we are out there in that conflict space. So what happened when you were ambushed in Iraq while you were covering just a story, a big story?
Thank you, Seema, for having me, and thank you for the introduction and for your distinguished panelists. In fact, it's not only in Iraq. I was also detained in Afghanistan for 3 days because we were campaigning in Khushabauddin, in Pakistan, Dushanbe for a month, and then on the day of the assassination of Ahmad Shah Massoud, we were allowed to enter from Tajikistan into the Northern Alliance area, where they had only 10% of that. So we traveled. After 17 hours, we reached to the compound of Ahmad Shah Massoud, where he was assassinated. And being an Arab, I was detained, and they said, you are a Taliban, you are with them. So they didn't let me do my work. So after 3 days, I believe Abdullah interfered personally there, where he pulled me out and he told him he is my personal friend, and I was safe and I was allowed to carry on with my mission. So it is a very difficult mission. It was tough because we could see the conflict between the two, the confrontation in front of our eyes. We crossed the rivers and we have seen it. And also we have seen our friends getting killed at the blank point when they knocked at their door, and 2 journalists were killed in Kunduz and Logar, even a province. They just put the gun on their head. And luckily for us, we escaped. My colleague, last second, he escaped from the guns of the Taliban. So there is a danger lying on the Afghanistan as much as was with Iraq when I was embedded with the American troops, and we were ambushed and taken into custody with the Iraqi government troops. And then after 10 days, we managed to escape, and that's going to be into a book where you will read all the real factual story of what's happening in Iraq. But it has been difficult, and I believe our friends in Afghanistan are facing difficulty now, especially women. They have been targeted, their family have been targeted. I'm getting daily news from there. I know they have been sitting at home. I know connection has been coming bad, and they are afraid of their life, and many of them are run away and fled the country. So that is a clear indication that whatever you may hear on the media of a good Taliban is not going to be on the ground reality as such, because there is a threat for anybody to report anti-Taliban, and gagging the media is a part of the bigger game where the Taliban are part of it. And I am sure with the coming days, lots of story will come out, because there is lots of problem happening, detention and taking people into custody. So let us watch and see what will be the next move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saeed, what about you? You also faced this.
Well, I was there for the first press conference by Nur Muhammad Taraki, who was a communist when the communists took over Kabul. Now, that is where the story really gets interesting. We know the Taliban as Taliban, we know the Mujahideen, but all of them in their genesis were trained and reared by the Americans. I mean, let us have no doubt about it. In 1978, Saur Revolution, when the communists came to power, that itself was a botched up. The Savak wanted to eliminate the left. The story got leaked, and then they came and they killed Dawood and his family, took power. Now that set the cat among the pigeons as far as the Americans were concerned. Don't forget, 70s were terrible for the Americans. Vietnam had happened. You had Portugal retreating from Africa. So you had Angola and Mozambique, thoroughbred communist governments. Mengistu in Ethiopia, Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, and you had Enrico Berlinguer in Italy. You had Marche in France. You had Corello in Spain. Kissinger was talking about a Marxist Western Europe. That was the fear in the mid-70s. They wanted to foreclose all of that here and eliminate the communist parties, for instance. Now, the opposite happened. Communists came to power. They had to be undermined. When they started undermining them through this Mujahideen business, then the Soviets came in 79, 80. You had the Soviet Union. Again, you see, there were two things that it may be of interest to viewers. A theory was being enunciated by Brzezinski. Brzezinski was very deeply involved. Kissinger was not. Brzezinski is the American strategic thinker who was directly involved in Afghanistan. First, he had enunciated a theory of regional influentials. In other words, the regional influential in his book was the Shah of Iran. Ziaul Haq was not bad. Don't forget, we had Morarji Bhai here at that time. You must not forget. They were very happy. We had Morarji here, we had JRJ in Sri Lanka. So this area was secure. They wanted to eliminate Dawood. Communists came. Now what do? And the Soviets have come in. Again, Mr. Brzezinski goes to Pakistan, peers over the parapets, looks into Afghanistan and says, this we have to get rid of them through.
Right.
And how? Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Americans got into a huddle. It was going to be American training and military hardware, Saudi money, and Pakistan was providing this, the logistical. Yeah.
But were you as a journalist feeling very vulnerable at that time when you were covering this?
Listen, a vulnerable journalist is one who takes sides. If you are on one side, then you are target for the other. If you are not, but if you are looking, for instance, I'll give you an example. I was told not to go out on this later, much later, after the Karzai had come in, much later. I was in Serena Hotel. Please don't go out. It is very dangerous. And when I did go out, I found that the Pakistanis in Kabul were pretending to be Indians because they were targets of the Afghans and not the Indians were very welcome. Movies were a soft power. Every Kabul family at night switched on Bollywood.
Right.
Our works were doing very well. We had schools and we had colleges. We had built the assembly. All of that was going very nicely. In fact, if you remember, General Stanley McChrystal complained. He was the corps commander. He complained loudly that look, Indian development works are so popular that we are having problem with the Pakistanis. They don't like it. So that was the narrative.
Let me put the question that you've raised, I mean, the point that you've raised to Kanika, because she's also come back from there. Now, did you feel, two things I want you to answer. One is what you said yourself, that you didn't have the cover of a larger media organization. So obviously you were working as a freelancer, right? Yes. And the second is what Saeed just said, that you, if you take sides, you're more vulnerable and not otherwise. Now, did you feel that with the Taliban, whether, suppose, you know, how did it work out for you and what did you experience?
So the thing is that quite naturally, I have, if indeed my social media channels are being monitored, which I think they may have been, I have obviously very vocally expressed my apprehension and that of its locals that if the Taliban takeover happens. But I've tried to maintain a very neutral tone. Despite that, I had gotten news in the morning of 16th August that Taliban had come looking for me and this other friend who was staying with me in one of the parts of the city that we had recently moved out of, and we were living in a different part of the city now, but they had come inquiring for me. I have no idea why they came, why did they have my photos, why were they aware of my movements, why did they know everything there was to know about me? I have no idea, and I have no compunction to know why they were me first. Speaking of sides, I think I did not choose sides. No, I did not. I was trying to maintain a very very low profile as a freelance journalist. But at the same time, my fear was not so much of being kidnapped by Taliban as it was being stuck in an ambush. And that can happen to anybody. So
Like
I was in Kandahar where the fighting broke out while I was there. So I was stuck that maybe I will be killed in a rocket strike. Or when I was stuck in Kabul, I was scared that maybe I will be crushed to death at the airport. The way the things are moving, I may not be able to reach the airport. So these were more my worries than being captured by Taliban. Until, of course, the word came out that they are looking for me.
So when you had the safety thing, you know, like when you had to flee and you needed to get out, do you feel that as a freelancer, it was weighed against you? And did you have more problems?
Of course it did, because I had to, whatever I did, I had to do in an individual capacity. I mean, there was no, no senior editor or a well-connected editor who was rooting for me. I was all on my own. I was trying to call my friends, my parents, everybody, that if they know anyone at all, that they can sort of, push my case and help me put on an evacuation flight. I didn't even know there is an evacuation flight that day. It was all by stroke of luck that there was one heading out on the 16th night, and they put me on it. After, mind you, I had to put in a lot of effort. I had to request and beg and do whatnot. And that's when I was put on a flight. It was not like I was a priority for them. Versus the other journalists who were staying at the embassy. Some senior journalists were also there while I was there. They were staying at the embassy. They had a solid backing, to help them, to protect them. So in that front, yes, I felt like I'm pretty much on my own. It did not phase me out, but I knew that okay, so if this is how it's going to be, I have to have a plan in place if I plan to cover it.
That's very interesting. You're something of a pioneer, if she can hear me. You're something of a pioneer, because the fact of the matter is that all, whether it is Afghanistan or Pakistan or Beijing or Kathmandu or Sri Lanka, our news channels are not there. They're not there even in Washington. They're not there. They all sometimes they cheat on us. What they do is they make someone stand up, a piece to camera, and they create the impression as if they have got a bureau. They don't. The imperial system works. You go NDTV, you watch Ravish Kumar. Ravish Kumar is a wonderful, I enjoy listening, but suddenly the program ends and you have BBC program. So the NDTV platform has been offered to the BBC. All the channels, without exception, have links with BBC, Reuters, CNN, Fox News on foreign affairs. We can do our Lalus and our Mulayams. That is all. The rest of it is, so this imperial system, when it is broken by someone as brave as the colleague who was speaking here, it would be nice to know, how long was she in Kabul?
I was there for 3 months.
That's a long period, right? And right in the middle of the action.
Actually, it was all happening in front of me, the way it started to the point where it ended. It was all in front of my eyes. So I think I stayed put. I mean, it was scary. I was getting distress calls from home that I should make the journey back. But something in me told me that I'm witnessing watershed moment and I should just stay.
Yes.
Right. So Dr. Awwad, what about you? Were you covered by a newspaper, and do you empathize with what Kanika has just told us, particularly?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Seema. I can feel myself among her because my cameraman was an Indian. And if I have to give the credit for my life, saving my life was he. And the Indian teams when the BBC and the CNN, Satinder Vindra and Sanjay Singh and everybody from the BBC and my cameraman. In fact, when we were entering into Afghanistan, the security guy who was in the cave and in the light of the torch, stamping our passport, and he knew that I have an Indian with me, and he forgot I am an Arab. So he hugged him and he kissed him and he started singing for him Hindi song. And we managed to enter into the city. And when I was detained, in fact, the CNN guy was telling the security people of Afghanistan that be careful. He's coming from India. His leave is in India. So that is where my India connection helped me in saving my life. In fact, even after the fall of Kabul, we were in Kabul, and we've seen the much love to India. So India is very much loved in Afghanistan, no matter what. And in fact, we should see it from this angle. In fact, India is a historical extension into that the partition have taken place. Otherwise, this is a strategic depth of India as well. And the low profile of India keeping in Afghanistan also made India gain the respect of all the nationalities.
But I want
That is it.
yeah,
Sorry.
I just want to take off from what you said, Saeed, a little bit ago. You know, when you are basically in the field where
Yes.
Indian journalists don't really go, there's the odd
Yes.
journalists, all of
Yes.
you have been.
Yes.
I remember when I also covered the Beirut war both times, what you were getting from the big guys that time, there was no television, but there was AP, AFP, Reuters, was entirely different from what
Yes.
you as an impartial journalist saw on the ground,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
with the
Yes.
Palestinians
They
getting
are.
hammered. So that's really something that really strikes you, doesn't it? That how dishonest sometimes we are in our coverage.
This is something we, our viewers, even our South Bloc must realize, that when you, as your experience in Lebanon or mine in Baghdad or in Syria, anywhere, when the Americans cover it, they are part of the imperial enterprise. When the Westerners covered it, they are part of the imperial enterprise. We are there as journalists. We were non-aligned, and we literally were non-aligned. So we say, well, this has happened. A 3-month coverage of the Gulf War with Doordarshan. Yaqub Qureshi was then the Director General. He was able to swing it for us that we can do it, and that will never happen. What we did and what we covered was extremely worrying for the Western establishment, because look, the narrative is being skewed by some Indian chaps who were there in the field. Our narrative is different, and when any one of them told the truth, he was lifted and thrown out. For instance, if you remember Peter Arnett, he was the hero of the Gulf War #1 Operation Desert Storm. But he went and covered some wrongdoing by the British and the American forces of a school and a chemical plant. They said they're hitting a chemical plant when actually it was a school. He covered it. Next time, the fellow is on the road. He doesn't have a job. I met him again during the Gulf War. He said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm doing my own thing, because they were out. So you are part of the American Western imperial project. From our side, there is no tradition of sending out newspapers. Yes, we therefore have to rely on our embassies. Let there be no mistake. We have to, थोड़ी सी मदद कर दो, जरा सा उधर बता दो क्या हो रहा है. You have to. There is perforce. You are not buying their line, but you have to lean on them. They're after yours. And you one had gone there after covering the Foreign Office so well that one knew a lot of them. Then, in the course of which, you got to know some journalists who were foreigners, who worked with other agencies. Then you got to know some Indian, some Arab journalists. They helped you. So this is the way it goes.
Own network. You try to create a safety.
But this is all a fly-by-night operation that we did. We need establishment. We need bureaus there. Otherwise, we will continue to be holding on to the coattails of the imperial in the media, and the media will condition our minds, and our minds will be conditioned in their mode. So that is the big danger.
This is what Seema, sorry, I was
please.
going to echo what exactly Saeed have said, because this is actually what happened on the ground. When we were in Afghanistan, American media, some of the American media were looking for Osama bin Laden, moving into places and say, our enemy, our enemy. Once you start calling enemies a name, that means you are taking side. That is one of the points. And more one point, which is you will be surprised, pushed out of the American into the custody of the Iraqi, and they were to be killed because they were not happy with my reporting of their atrocities and treating of the prisoners in Iraq.
There you are.
And in fact, my tapes, by the way, when I was captured by the Iraqi revolutionary people, they saw my tape and they said, this is your way of fighting with the American, save your skin. These are the issues one has to be as journalists on the ground. And that is where we paid our life on that. And 2 of my colleagues died.
Well, Seema, I promise you, he's talking about Afghanistan. During the American invasion, you had a man called Rivera, Rivera, representing the Fox News. He used to whip out a revolver on live television.
Wow.
Where is Osama? I'm going to kill it. A revolver on live television.
The cave of Tora Bora.
That was the free media for you. And the copycat, us, a pity that we have not. We had an opportunity, we still have an opportunity to go and create credibility. The credibility of Western media.
Yeah.
Western media, the credibility is sci-fi at the moment.
Yeah.
And of course, I will not talk about our media because I don't think dog does not eat dog, not on television.
So Kanika, out of all of us, you're the youngest who hasn't had the benefit of past, of the past,
Yes.
where journalism also was very idealistic and passionate, but you had all these aberrations that our senior colleagues have talked about. So while you were reporting from there and trying to get your stories across into the papers, and also seeing the ground and reporting internationally, did you see this discrepancy?
Yes, because I have seen that, they international publications have been sort of glorifying the misery in Afghanistan and sort of always showing the poverty and the war and the misery and the deplorable condition of people, through the lens of a foreign media, because I think poverty sells in their countries. I, on the other hand, before the war sort of picked up and intensified in the country, I was trying to do a more positive human stories, because not all was that bad out there. I mean, and I had a hard time finding a publication that would take that. So I had to basically just always, to be able to make money while on the ground, I had to continue to show, maybe balance the positive human stories with, this war and conflict narrative, just so I could stay afloat. So I did, of course, see a lot of discrepancy. In fact, I will not name the publication, but there is a very big publication who was in touch with one of my friends who's a local journalist from Afghanistan, and he was trying to bring them footage, like a sort of balanced footage of, maybe X event and X was good and bad, but they said no, we only want Y. We just want to show the war that is happening here because that is what sells. I mean, they were very, very categorical and very clear on their agenda as to what they wanted to show. So I think, yes, the Western media has a lot of negative influence, not negative per se, but has a very solid influence on the way people perceive Afghanistan today. For example, case in point being the way the media is centered on Kabul airport right now. I mean, the rest is as if nobody gives a damn. There is so much happening. There are still people.
Absolutely.
People are running around, but no, all people want to talk about for the last 2 weeks is the airport and the evacuation. Just get done with it, because that's where, I think the American army shines, because they have been carrying out the evacuation very seamlessly. So it's kind of the story that they probably want on their media channels to continue running. So I feel there's insane amount of discrepancy there on
Yes, and the march of the Taliban has not been without consequences for the people of Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
Which you don't see or read about at all. You've seen that yourself, Dr. Awwad. You're from Syria, and somehow the international media has always looked on your region in terms of black and white. Either it's all black or it's white if they are involved, right? So the fact that Syria itself is such a rich civilization, people are so educated and sophisticated, none of that would come out in that coverage of that war. Didn't that make you angry?
It makes me angry. In fact, this is where I always focus on the Syrian civilization as a mystery. We also have history of 10,000 years behind us. So they are already new phenomena. Even the American history is a new phenomenon. And if they have started the policy of regime change, it was only done by Wesley Clark when he has already been told by the administration, he was the former chief of the army staff of the United States, that they wanted to occupy 7 nations in 5 years. And Syria and Iraq was part of it, and Libya. So that's a clear indication of the dirty game they are playing in our region and creating havoc in our area. Having said that, I would always be, very disturbing to see the way they are treating us in the region, the way they are projecting us, and the way they project their own way of being human. When I was with forward unit with the United States in Iraq, I was in the front unit, which were immediately were watching the war with them. When they knew I'm an Arab, they took me to the maintenance and repair. They want to show me they're a humanitarian. I say, I am a professional journalist. I'm not here doing PR exercise for you. Get lost. Bring me back or I'll go on my own. I am not going to stay backside. You can't take me for granted because I am supposed to report what you want. So this is the problem here. And the problem we are, even journalists are not understanding that to report on the ground, when Saeed Bhai was in Iraq, reporting live from there, it was different to see on CNN or to watch on this. I was the only Arab in Khushabauddin when my colleague was in Kabul with Al Jazeera. I was there. We were reporting live report. So therefore, we need to project all these things to the world that, look, our area is not only, terrorism, is not only, hard extremists and all. This is all a new phenomenon you created. If Saeed by saying that CIA spent $500 million to create Taliban, and now you're bringing back Taliban, it's a clear indication that you want to play with the religion of the people. It has nothing to do with Islamic Afghanistan, which is 1,400 years old. So therefore, we need to understand ourselves how to deal, especially in South Asia, Seema, how to deal with issues related or unrelated to us. You must also apply it on you, because what happened in Syria, it happened in Tehran, it will happen. We need to understand the game plan and be prepared for every eventuality.
Seema, I would like to make two small points.
I'm giving you the last word on this now.
The two small points. The American departure from Afghanistan has been messy, right? But it also brings about an end to the forever wars. Is that a good outcome or a bad outcome? Or are we going to lament that we don't like the looks of these people who are now sitting in Kabul? Let us wait and watch their movement. Within a week, we are already passing judgment on them. And the same known culprits in the Western media. I saw Christian Amanpour asking Chuck Hagel of the former defense secretary, you mean to say you're going to give up on terrorism? You're going to give up? We are going to give up on our mission of democracy and human rights? This is the media. There's much more sense among politicians. The media there is a menace, let me tell you, on these issues. The neocon media is a menace. Two things. End of forever wars is a good thing or a bad thing. And that they have been ousted by Taliban, should we lament the coming of Taliban or celebrate the ending of wars? When this fellow Trump asked Jimmy Carter, he said, China is going ahead of us. What should we do? Carter's reply is pithy. He said, China had its last war in 1978. That was the skirmish with Vietnam. China had its last war in 1978. We have not stopped being at war. 72 invasions since World War II. Now, if there's an end, if this little humility is introduced into the American operation, I think it is good for the world. Let us wait and watch.
On that note, thank you so much. Thanks a lot, everyone. I'm not even going to try and condense this because the points that were made were amazing. And actually coming from people who faced it gives, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.